Welcome everyone to this recording, or if you're here live, this is week 9 of the International Field Study Experience. And today we're going to talk very briefly about the assignment. We talked last week about the assignment. If you have not seen the video from last week, I highly recommend you watch last week's live class meeting video. It's right there in the module 8. We talked about the industry focus memo. We talked about the presentation to your sponsor. We talked about the feedback and reflection with your sponsor. And we talked about the final weeks, week 11 and 12, the team and the individual reflection and the portfolio project. They're all there. One thing to note is that the due dates are a little flexible because of when you're presenting with when you're meeting with your sponsor. But in terms of the assignments, look at each one. It says like number 9, number 10, number 11, number 12. Even if you're not doing them in the week where they're posted, you still should be doing them in that order. That's why I put the numbers in front of those assignment things. Is it going to break the globe in half if you do them out of order? No, it's going to be a little difficult in some cases, but I think, again, your best approach is to do those items in the order of the numbers in front of each item there piece. If at any point you have any questions whatsoever, always feel free to reach out to me for questions. I've already talked with one team in terms of setting up the Zoom call for their meeting with their sponsor. If you have any questions or difficulties, let me know if I can help with that as well. So thank you very much. I want to welcome to our call. This is our final global speaker. And, the last one that was recorded with Dr. Vijay Laxmi, she was a former doctoral candidate student of mine. And this week we have Amanda Knowles from El Salvador, live via Zoom satellite, I guess. She's a former student of mine who I believe was in El Salvador when she was a student of mine, and she's still in El Salvador. Um, uh, Amanda, are you still there? And now she's frozen. Oops. I'm assuming she's going to jump right back in. So Amanda Knowles, she is, again, a former student of mine who was doing some research specifically in El Salvador and has been working in El Salvador on a very specific project, which provides some interesting challenges. And I thought it was a good idea to have our last conversation with her in terms of that more kind of cultural element, the language barrier, the idea of working with people in different places. She has been working in El Salvador for a number of years, and I'm kind of talking as we delay a little bit here. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording until she gets back in. All right, so we had a little bit of pause here because we had our guest speaker is in El Salvador and there's a storm and it is messing with power. But Amanda, welcome. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. I'm glad you were able to recover from the little brief power outage there.
Hotspots help.
Yeah.
We'll go with that. If it gets dark, I'm sorry. I'll still be here, but maybe without lights.
There you go. Well, I've got a flashlight if you need it. So Amanda, correct me if I'm wrong, you were a student of mine a couple years ago, a grad student. You were in the military and you got out of the military and you ended up in El Salvador and working on some issues, and now you're highly embedded within this work within El Salvador. And I would like you to really elaborate on what I barely was able to put together there.
Sure, absolutely. The reason that I joined the Air Force was before I joined, I went to Ghana, and that was my first kind of introduction to international development. And while I was there, I was working with an Australian NGO, and it kind of really opened my eyes to the global issues. But at the same time, it made me realize how woefully unprepared I was. I had just graduated as a medical student, like as a medical assistant student. And when I got to this organization, there was just a lot of things that I saw that I didn't like, a lot of money going missing, a lot of the programs not having any sort of long-term sustainable impact. And so I said, how can I go to school and earn money for school, get more life experience? And that ended up in the Air Force. I spent 7 years as an airborne systems engineer flying on the RC-135, the rivet joint. And again, I also found myself in a place where, while I had a really nice job and I liked what I was doing, I didn't really think that the mission was something for me, that it was my way to leave my mark on the world, make a positive impact. So when I got out, I started volunteering here in El Salvador with an organization called Centro de Intercambio y Solidaridad in their water projects, clean water projects here. And I've been here ever since. So now I'm working mostly with Centro Arte para la Paz, where I live is a place that was heavily affected during the armed conflict. There were 16 massacres that happened in this area. And so I began by recording the testimonies of the survivors. And since then, I have become more involved with the project management, monitoring, and evaluation with the center. I also do consulting work for a feminist organization, a local feminist organization, and that's more to deal with like the extreme inequality as far as gender goes here in El Salvador. I hope I explained it better. I tried to condense a few years into
No, that sounds incredible. And so I want to put things into a construct that I work with often is I refer to these as the 4-letter A's. So there's awareness, and without awareness, you can't even network with or become an ally to an issue. And then even if you are aligned with people, you're an ally to an issue, you can become someone who would call themselves an advocate, and in some cases, even an activist in certain areas. So I'm imagining that your initial experiences in El Salvador was becoming aware of many issues.
Absolutely, absolutely. Especially the environmental degradation that's happening here, the effects of climate change, and the inequality and the effects of the armed conflict that are still causing trauma and damage to the younger generations here today.
And after you've built up some awareness, and I'm sure you're probably always becoming aware of something, some new element, right? Now, do you consider yourself to be part of a group of allies on an issue?
Absolutely. It takes a while, I think, as a foreigner working in these kind of environments. There's always kind of a level of distrust. And it has taken, I've been here 6 years, and I think it's taken this long, but I absolutely do now feel that I have not only made allies and been accepted in kind of the movements that are happening here, but I want to say that I only have that because I have put in the time to really, understand and all that. But yeah.
And I would imagine if you look at that level of trust in terms of like reputation, am I accurate in my assessment that you probably have moments where you think that if you do something wrong, you can undo the trust that you've been able to build up over those 6 years?
Absolutely. And this is kind of going back to what I was saying about in Ghana, and my experience in Ghana is that there are so many organizations that come and go, that come and build wells or have these programs, and then they leave. So in a lot of these countries, they're kind of like, oh, the gringo, or these organizations, they come and they don't really care about the long-term impact. So a lot of these people are very, very wary. And so I'm always very on guard to think deeply about what I'm doing and what I say is becoming less now that I have the trust of people and but I think that it's always something that's in my mind that says, hey, you know, it takes time to build these relationships and require a lot of attention on everybody's part.
Are there times where it's not even something that you do, but there's just general news out of the United States of something that people in El Salvador disagree with or they become irritated by or whatever, and then because you're from the States, they associate you with that, even though you had nothing to do with that?
You know, I won't say so much that it's that, but it's, you know, the United States supported the government during the armed conflict here and was part of a lot of the atrocities that happened in this community. I mean, the School of the Americas, they trained the death squads. They were trained, you know, to carry out just atrocities in this area. So there's always kind of this wariness on the part of the people here about the people that come to help and the United States in general about our foreign policy and Latin America in general. So I've had that come up often in meetings and conferences with people, and they say, you know, we don't need people from the United States. We don't want their help because they've done so much damage in this region. And it's hard to hear for me, but it also has some truth to it. So it's difficult to navigate.
Well, does this push you into a position where maybe it's not so much you being the advocate, but you helping others who are advocates?
Absolutely. And that's something that I always say. The other day, I met a member of the diaspora. As you probably know, there's so many Salvadorans living in the United States as an effect of this civil war and from the gang violence here. But she was saying, you know, thank you so much for giving a voice to our people. And I said, I'm not giving a voice to them. I'm just raising up their voices. I'm helping them discover their own voice. I really see myself as like a node in a network, and that's where my nerd comes out, I guess, in my time in the Air Force working on computers, but a node in the network, and I'm just helping them tell their own stories and helping them find their own way. And yeah, I definitely see myself as an ally more than anything.
Well, and then the final letter A is activist. Sometimes activist has a negative connotation. Um, is that a word you're wary of there? Is that a a conversation or a label that would be something to avoid in El Salvador?
In my case, yeah, absolutely. Because of the political climate here, we have to be very careful about activism, getting involved in politics and that sort of thing. So when I first came here, I used to go and support the women in the marches. And that's not that I don't do that anymore because as a foreigner, there's a lot of I mean, there's laws saying we can't get involved in politics as far as supporting candidates and voting and all of that. But then that has kind of bled over into the general consciousness of the people as they don't like to necessarily see anybody foreign being an activist in any sort of sense. So that is, I don't call myself an activist here at all.
I guess it's weird when you think about it, like people want to jump into a mode, you know, they want to jump into a job description, they want to jump into the, you know, the round or the square peg in the square hole type of a definition of things. But sometimes and I just recently had this conversation with another professor. Um, if you focus on a job title, that that doesn't necessarily capture or reflect what you're doing. And if you're looking at a mission in life, what you want to contribute to the world, what you want to achieve, whether you want to start something or stop something, you know, it comes down to this idea of, and I learned this seriously, like 30 years ago or so, someone had shared this phrase with me. I think it was Celtic, and it basically translates to, if you cannot find a door, then make a door. That idea of, you don't always find a job listing that says what you want to say. Sometimes you got to create your job, create your work in order to achieve your mission. Do you feel as if you've pretty much, created what you're doing right now? A lot of what you're doing is not necessarily someone was hiring you for it, but here's where you are.
I It's so funny that you asked that because that's exactly what happened with me. When I got involved with this organization, I had the idea to I went from collecting these testimonies to realizing like, hey, we have the space, we have the personnel with the connections in the communities, we have this audio visual equipment. And we're a center of art for peace, meaning we want to teach young people how to use art to and other mediums to express themselves and talk about things that are important to them. So I said, hey, why don't we do this project where we teach young people to make videos about things that matter to them, about their communities? And everybody was excited about it. And I said, okay, so what about, monitoring and evaluation and project management? What about those things? And it was kind of like crickets. Like it wasn't really, I mean, they do have some of that, but it's not developed at all. And so I went from just making videos for this organization to now being in charge of managing projects and monitoring and evaluation. And they saw the value in saying, hey, now we can show with data what we're doing and the impacts that it's having on people. And now we can have processes to make sure that our projects are successful. So it's been great. And I really did create this position for myself. But it's not without hardships, I would say, because every time you try to, everybody's a little bit resistant to change, I think. And so trying to say like, hey, I'm not saying this is how it has to be done, but here's a way, if we want to get there, to show donors or, anybody that our actions, our projects have results, like here's a way we can do it. I think it's worthwhile, but it can be difficult. So great question. Yeah, I never thought about it that way, that I really did kind of create my own position that I'm in now.
Well, I think too, one thing I'm hearing from you is, um, and I see this with a lot of projects, a lot of organizations, a lot of leaders, they want to start a project and boom, it's like they want to be on step 5 immediately. They don't want to invest the time to really build that awareness. In a lot of my courses, even this current course, I have students defining some terms, and you've probably seen this with courses you've taken with me, defining some terms, making some connections, making some applications before they're able to get into the true work of the course. Even recently, I was writing I do writing that has nothing to do with my academic field or my area of specialty. And I was writing, well, you were in the military, you'll appreciate this. Um, you know, um, when it comes to submarines, it's always SS for the non-nuclear submarines we used to have, or SSN for nuclear submarine, or SSBN for the ballistic missile submarines. But between 1920 and 1979, there were 33 other types of submarines that were not SS or SSN. It was some other letter coding kind of thing. And it took me, so I'm doing some writing about one particular example, but I kept finding myself running into these roadblocks. And it wasn't until I was able to finally identify all 33, define all 33, and give examples of all 33, and why it did or did not work or whatever, that I was truly able to understand the one thing that I was trying to write about. And so it's almost as if putting in the time in terms of that awareness, and in many cases, it's like learning what you don't know. Because you go into a project with some assumptions, with an existing body of knowledge. but there's just things that you don't know. And it could be geography based, it could be culture, language, history, economics, whatever it is, political. It could be scientific, whatever it is. There are so many different things that when you go into a project, you don't know. And one of the things I noticed with project management is that, to me, a lot more of the initial effort should be in the learning what you realized you need to learn kind of a thing. And if we did that, things down the road would be so much easier, so much better aligned or effective, efficient, that kind of a thing. Um, what are your thoughts on investing time into that awareness and learning before you get into the actual like doing and consulting?
I think it is so, so important. That's something that I've learned just in my life, that no matter how much I think that I know, there's always way more that I don't know. And learning to question my assumptions has been monumental for me at managing projects and stuff like that. So that's always one of my steps is, I always say, what are my assumptions here? Do people want to participate? Do people care about this issue? Do people whatever, So I always take a lot of time to say to myself, what is your thinking behind this and what are you missing? And how can you find that information? And it takes a lot of time, but it's absolutely worth it.
I'm wondering if you can share with us, maybe if you can pinpoint it, that first time where you felt like you weren't necessarily learning, someone was actually learning from you. Like you knew enough about something that someone was actually learning from you in what you're doing now.
Oh man. Okay, I do have an example, and I think it might be very fitting for this class. So I took sustainable development with you. And so sustainable development has always, I had a class in my bachelor's also that kind of just lit me on fire about this and kind of set me on my path. But it's just the world we live in now as in terms of international development. And so I always am thinking about that, looking at targets, seeing how what we're doing can fit into these targets, all of that. While working on this audiovisual project I was discussing earlier, I was talking to the coordinator and saying like, hey, if we're going to design this project, we need to look at these things. And initially, she was very against it. And she said, I don't want to hear more about sustainable development, just because she didn't have any context, she didn't know anything about it. She's a journalist actually by trade and came to be the coordinator of our media library. So being able to say like, hey, like this is what it is. This is kind of what most organizations now, it's like their framework that they're working towards. And that ended up getting the attention of the director of my organization and the head administrator to say like, wow, she knows about this. It's something that we don't really understand. We were kind of told to put this in our plan for the year and our 5-year plan, and we don't really get it, So I just had the opportunity to teach like the reasons why we're doing all of these things, the reasons why the UN has set forth these goals. So, and I just had a joy doing that because for me, it's very dear to my heart.
That's great. That's great. First I should point out that, by the way, I just received this email yesterday. I will be teaching GST 6610 sustainable development, like you were pointing out, this fall from
Yay!
September. It's a 12-week course, September 16th through December 14th. I'll also be teaching nonprofit management, social and sustainable entrepreneurship course in fall A from September 16th to October 26th. Free parking with validation. Anyway, that aside, I find that there's things that I teach to other people, and then I have these moments where it's like, wait a minute, I can learn a lesson from that myself. I could apply that concept to this scenario that I'm in right now, or let's use this framework as a construct to figure this out, not just to have something that I teach students, but to use this in a context. And there's a behavioral science type approach where I look at how to connect observations to actions to measurable outputs to goals that I've been using with students when I realized that they were having problems with their research. And I was in a presentation one time in front of like industry audience, and I realized, well, this would work. And so I was sharing that. And now there are companies that pay me to come out and teach them this, workshop, if you will. And it's just crazy how sometimes there's things you learn, and then well after you learn it, you realize, oh, I should be applying it this way. Is there something you recall learning? It doesn't have to be from me. Is there something like you remember a moment where something you learned in a class all of a sudden, oh man, now I'm actually using this, whether it's a quote or a piece of information or whatever. Um, it's like you don't know when that moment's going to happen, but there's those moments where you realize, oh, yeah, I kind of learned something like this when I was in college. Do you ever find yourself running into those types of situations?
Oh, good question. I do. The example that comes to mind is in grant writing, actually, because I use all of. I just won a big grant for us, so
Oh,
I'm maybe
congratulations.
that's why it's on my mind. But just constructing the here's the problem, here are some solutions, kind of. I use that all the time in grant writing, and so far I've won 2 grants, and I never thought I would be a grant writer. So just learning to like formulate my thoughts and into finding a problem and saying here's some solutions that other people have tried, and here's how it has worked, and here why it maybe didn't work, and that has always helped me. Really, is the critical thinking and working through problems that I have done all through grad school.
Great, great. Make sure you put that on your CV, those grants. That's very big in many circles, and include the dollar amount and the all that kind of stuff. I was talking about resumes and CVs last week. I made the analogy that a CV is kind of like having a pantry, whereas a resume is kind of like a specific recipe for dinner kind of a deal. And there's a lot of things that I end up putting on my CV over time. I'm quoted in a lot of different articles, and I speak in front of different audiences, and I write a lot. And I'm always putting those on my CV because you don't necessarily know, when you're going to need that skill or when you're going to need to communicate to someone that you have that skill. Have there been, we've talked about things you've done. Have there been courses or certifications now that you've engaged in El Salvador
Not in El Salvador, although I'm
or while
starting.
you've been there?
Yeah, while I've been here, so I finished my first master's here, and um, I have done. Let me see. It was monitoring and evaluation, um, and that was a course by FHI 360. I forget which website I took it through, but it was a great introductory course to monitoring and evaluation. And I actually applied it to that project I was talking to you about because I said, hey, we need this. I don't know how to do this. I'll learn to do it. So, and then I did take, what was a grant? It was called Grant Seeking from Nonprofit Ready. Although here there's a lot of interesting things that I would like, courses that I would like to take in just different, sustainable stoves, because a lot of people here work with, they cook with leña, which is like wood, in these stoves. And it's, we have a big problem with deforestation here. So I would love to, take little courses like that, permaculture. I'm keeping my options open as far as that goes, but there's so much out there.
Well, you never know. And you never know what you're going to encounter and what you're going to see as something. in a very strange turn of events, a number of weeks ago, I took a micro course on axe throwing. I'm not kidding. I had never thrown an axe before at an actual, like, target. And then there was a competition, and I ended up winning the competition. And I don't know who was more surprised, me or everyone else, because I had no idea what I was doing. But not that I'm going to become an axe thrower now, but I think that there's times when you realize that you can learn new things, and you can even be successful with brand new things, even things you didn't know you were going to learn or be able to do, before that. And it just kind of has become this reminder to myself that it's like you can learn new things and you can be successful with new things, if you're willing to, try, um, and do that. I want to give Allie's with us live. I want to give, I don't want to put her, in the hot seat here, but Allie, if you have any questions, please, please feel free to chime in at any moment here.
One question is, thinking of as you were talking is, something I think, so I'm doing a master's in international relations, and I think the big thing is figuring out how to navigate any career when you are merging those cultures. So have you ever felt like, have you ever had a difficult interaction with someone in El Salvador when either when you were beginning or not, where you had to figure out how to um, communicate so that you could reach an end goal or a decision, and that cultural relationship kind of played into that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like I was talking a little bit before, I think it's common all over the world, but people are maybe hesitant to change or to embrace change. And, I'm one of maybe 3 or 4 foreigners that live in this town. And so people here have dealt with a lot of difficulties in their lives and haven't had the opportunities that I do. And so I always try to not come across as a know-it-all or threatening or, but you always have, people are people no matter where you are. And there's always office politics. There's always, I think we should do it this way. Well, no, I think we should do it that way. And it's difficult. I'm not going to lie. And uh, it's especially difficult when, here, I'm not sure where Allie, where you're interested in working in or where you're working now, but here is a very conservative, very religious culture, and that's not where I come from, at all. And so it's always it's always kind of trying to pivot and meet people where they are and having patience and understanding and um, being humble, I think. and and at the same time you also kind of have to stand up for yourself and what you believe in, because if you don't have a good handle on the language, there's a lot of times that people will take advantage of that and railroad you and use your lack of language or cultural understanding as a way to say, well, she doesn't know what she's talking about. She doesn't, she doesn't understand the context. She doesn't know, and therefore her opinion is valid. And so I've dealt with all of that, and I know it's cliche to say, but just take it one day at a time and realize that no matter where you are, those things are going to happen.
Well,
Thank you.
something you said there reminded me, there were times when you were my student that some of the other students would be like, "Are you okay? Are you in fear?" kind of a thing. Um, uh, and I know that there's the professional side, but there's also the personal side. Uh, you know, just as you were talking about building trust in terms of the work you do, I'm sure you've had to build trust in terms of the idea of, like you said, you're one of the only, few foreigners in your little town, kind of a thing. Um, is that something that time has helped in doing? Do you see yourself outside of work fitting in the community more?
Um, Here is a little bit more difficult because so many of the young people have migrated. So people that are my age are either in the United States or they already have a few children. And it's, like I said, it's a conservative, religious town. So it's more like family oriented. But what I will say is that when I hear, there's also a big issue with like sexism, sexual harassment, sexual violence against women. And so I had to deal with fear for a long time. And I do, not in the town anymore. If I go to other areas that I'm not familiar with, I do deal with that fear. Here, not so much, because I'm, like you said, I'm more ingrained in the community and people recognize me. And if something is happening, I know that I have like backup. You know, I know that my neighbors know me. I know the people in the stores, and so that I don't feel alone as maybe I did in the first few years. And the same with the people in the community, is they might not be so ready to say something or stand up if there's a case of sexual harassment, if whatever's happening. But now it's a lot different. Being part of the network has really changed my level of fear operating in this community.
Well, a different kind of a conversation about security. This course is focusing on cybersecurity. And one of the things that many of the student teams have looked at is how culture and even language has made an impact on whether a nation is ready to or willing to be more resilient when it comes to cybersecurity. I don't know if you hear about or talk about privacy of information or internet privacy, security, things like that, and think about things in terms of language, culture, economy, whatever it is. Do you have any thoughts around? I would imagine that the students would really benefit from hearing some insights you might have when it comes to, again, cybersecurity resilience, and even just like the discourse over that, perhaps in El Salvador. What are your thoughts with that?
Absolutely. So a lot of the organizations here, they use Telegram, for example, because there is an animosity towards human rights organizations to these NGOs, because they more support, they're more democratic. They're working to kind of change the business as usual, the status quo. And so a lot of human rights defenders are at risk. People have been jailed. The government is now using the Pegasus software to spy on journalists. So all of that is in our minds all of the time. So we are very, very careful about what we post publicly, about how we communicate about things that are happening. So a lot of people, organizations, they mostly use things like Telegram to communicate. And even then, there's always issues that are arising, and that's something that we're learning to kind of navigate, and it's being more talked about now. Is like, how do we let me change this a little bit, is also that there's a lot of like troll farms and any sort of activities that are seen as like being questioning of the government, or pushing for change, they get attacked. So they'll get like dogpiled, and people will get followed, they'll get doxxed. So it's very strange now with the web and communications, as we're trying to further our mission and continue doing what we're doing without putting our people or our organization at risk.
Definitely a significant concern as you're going forward. And I would imagine that it's kind of like being, I hate to say this phrase, between a rock and a hard place, but I would imagine that there's a youth that you might encounter that is not experienced and old enough to understand certain things, but there's also probably an elderly element you're dealing with who are too old to truly understand the implications and the consequences for certain things, and so you're in that Oreo cookie middle of that that kind of operational age and awareness where there's probably a little bit more pressure on you because these people over here and above, up here and down here that aren't thinking the things that you're thinking.
Yes and no. You know, it's very interesting when I was collecting the testimonies, and even we had a series when I was working in the media library where we were talking to the women who were part of the guerrilla movement during the war and just trying to collect their stories. And they're older women, you know, and because they're so long, there's been a culture of fear about speaking out because you could be disappeared or jailed or all these things. They're very aware that they're very aware of and scared to talk about their experiences because in the past it has led to atrocities. I would say more so with the younger generation is that they maybe don't understand the whole picture yet. But the older generation, they're very aware that anything that leaves my mouth can get me in trouble, or anything that ends up on the web can come back to haunt me. So I would say with the older generation, they're much more aware, even if they're not aware of the web and they maybe not even know how to read, but they're about security. They're very in tune.
Sure. Fascinating. Well, Amanda, first off, Allie, do you have any last things you want to ask or talk about?
I do not.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us, Allie. And if you're watching a recording of this, I hope this is, again, a different kind of a conversation about this, our last in our series of our global speaker guests that we've had this course. You know, the whole purpose was to not only bring in different experiences and perspectives and different frameworks with which we talk about these issues. We have had so many different conversations that I just hit my keyboard. Sorry about that. We've had so many conversations that I could not have had. I do not have this experience in this part of this world. I do not have this experience with this specific job type. I do not have this perspective because I am not this kind of a person. And my goal when I do these guest speaker series is always to bring in some things that may be directly related to what we're talking about. If not, definitely things that are related to the act of going and what do we do from here? What do we do with this information? What do we do with these skills? How do we impart some of these ideas into beyond the classroom and into our personal and professional lives? And it's always been the goal that these speakers have that I have chosen these speakers to contribute these specific elements. So Amanda, I want to thank you. This is not the first time that you've talked with some of my students, and you've been you are a former student of mine. And I really want to thank you for what you share with us today. And though I am less worried than I was a couple of years ago, I still want you to be safe. And whether it's a storm or because of the just the nature of where you are, always be safe. And if you ever find yourself coming out to California, please give me a heads up, and maybe we'll figure something out.
Thank you for having me, Darin. It's been lovely. And I just want to say to Allie and to anybody who reads or watches this recording, if you are interested in El Salvador or in Latin America in general and you need anything, please reach out to me. I'm available for questions, or if you want to build a network, please let me know. I'm here to support. And I would love to come to California. I saw there's a conference, I think it was in San Francisco, that I've been eyeing. So maybe but you're in San Diego. No, it wasn't San Diego.
Well,
You're outside of San Diego.
I'm in Los Angeles area, which is about 2 hours north of 2-hour drive north of San Diego. And I go to I've been to San Francisco like 3 times this year already. And it's only like a 6-hour drive, which it's just 3 hours each for me and my wife to drive up there. But anyway, it's a big, tall state. When I lived, I grew up in California, but when I lived in New England area on the East Coast, it's like this complete different experience where it's like a 4-hour drive and you could have hit 4 or 5 states whereas in California, a 4-hour drive and you're still in California, you know, depending on which roads you pick there. But it does change your mind about things and doing that. Well, Amanda, thank you very much. Allie, thank you for joining us. And for all the other students who watch a recording of this, again, if you ever have any questions about the assignments, feel free to reach out. Amanda Knowles has offered that if you have any specific questions, I know you can find her on LinkedIn or you can reach out to her through me. And again, thank you very much as we are kind of in the middle here of week 9 of 12. A lot of things coming up over the next few weeks, but I can definitely see the light in the end of the tunnel as we go forward. So thank you very much, everyone, and don't be a stranger.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining, Allie.